Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Hello, Matt. Welcome to Plot Twist Radio.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So before we get going, you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, yeah. So I'm Matt. I'm the newly minted Chief Commercial Officer at Corpora. I joined there in the last week or so, when by the time this comes out, having spent 5 years at Microsoft. And before that, I spent a bit of time in SAP technical consultancy. And before that, I was the frontman of a metal band.
Quite the plot twist there. So like you said, you just went from running a metal band to stepping into a leadership role. That's not exactly a traditional career path. When did everything change for you?
So the first thing about being in a metal band, especially at the time that we were doing it, my little brother actually is in a metal band himself now. And we were talking about the money that he's making. And I was like, yeah, we weren't making that 15 years ago. So, which is a different thing. But at the time, you kind of had to swallow like the fact that you were just going to, bum around. I was living in my girlfriend's parents' spare bedroom with her and what have you. And every year we go to Brighton in the UK, we have the August bank holidays, like a famous time to kind of take a weekend trip or whatever. And we're walking along Brighton Pier, and my now wife turned to me and she said, when are you going to grow up and when we're going to move out of my parents' spare bedroom? And I was like, yeah, it does feel like maybe it's about time. I was maybe 26, 27. I've been doing it for nearly 10 years by this point. And the band were just about to release what ended up being our final album, which we put out 2017. It did well. We toured it. It did a bunch of copies. It's actually my favorite of the records we did. It's not the most successful one, but it's the one that I like the most. And then we got round after the initial touring, and we all looked at each other and we're like, yeah, no, we haven't got it in us to do the record the justice that it deserves and go and hit the road again for years on end, like we had with the previous records. So we called it a day. And actually the kind of proof is in the pudding, in that after the band split up, within a year, I was married, our bassist was married, our drummer was married, all three of us bought a house, and all four of us, after a couple of years, all had kids. So there was this like pent up need to grow up, I think, within the group. And it was a good time for us. Like we had a fantastic run as a band. We got to see the world. I got to Australia. I toured America. I toured Europe umpteen times. I was really blessed to have that experience and kind of take it forward and clearly use it to kind of shape an interesting career, kind of moving beyond the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds really fun, but I can understand where the twist goes. I mean, as an author, I don't make a lot of money. It's fun, but I have to have another job. And so it's hard to balance that sometimes. So I understand why you made the pivot. But take me back to the time that you were in the band. What did that chapter of your life teach you that people maybe wouldn't expect?
So I think the period immediately before we formed the band, I was a fairly, I think, socially awkward person. I didn't have a lot of friends at school. I was a little bit of a weird kid. I like to play Counter-Strike in the evenings, and I build my own computers and stuff. And I wasn't like the cool kid in school, for damn sure. And then at 17, I went and worked at a music venue. I actually loved some like these early kind of the niche genre I was in was called deathcore. And in like 2006, 2007, there wasn't really anyone putting those shows on. And I really wanted to see some of the bands. So I was like, I'll just do it. So I ended up putting some shows on. The venue that I used kind of liked me and then brought me in. I ended up living above that venue in a little flat. And I kind of worked for like £30 a week plus free rent and as much beer from the bar as I wanted to drink at 16 years old, 17 years old. And all the door staff we used at the bar were the same door staff at all the clubs in Nottingham, in the city where I grew up. So I immediately had a flat in town. I had free beer. I could get into any club that I wanted. And I just joined, formed like a cool band. So I went from having like no friends to having all the friends. And it was like, looking back, it didn't feel this way at the time. It was a really difficult transition to go from nobody really giving a damn to everyone wanting to be your friend. There, I got like a big ego, right? I became quite arrogant. I became a real difficult person to like, I think. And then I had to reconcile that. So as I kind of matured and got towards my early 20s and the band kind of continued to grow, I had to learn to kind of be humble. I had to relearn how to deal with people, right? Because I'd never had to. And then I'd had this, two polarized experiences. And actually through those very polarized experiences of the world, I learned how to kind of empathize, how to be humble, how to be open and how to listen to people and how to understand people. And that actually became something that I was so bad at up until I was about 21. It became the thing that I was really good at from 21 onwards because I had to learn. I didn't have a choice. I had to learn how to do that. And that's the thing that I think throughout my career, leaving music and going into tech and kind of moving forward, that's the thing that has kind of stood out for me. I think I'm able to kind of understand the room, understand someone's wants and desires and needs and the things that they're trying to achieve. And that's been the way that I've kind of formed, the relationships that I have with people. And then those relationships are the things that I've been able to then leverage to either do a deal or, set up a new partnership or get a new job or whatever. That's kind of the thing that I learned the most. And it's in constant focus, especially when you're touring, because you might be playing to 500-600 people a night. You finish the show, you go do the merch or you go hang out and people want to chat to you, want to talk to you. And it's constant all the time. You've got to be switched on and you've got to be able to make people in that moment feel really special, like you care. And I had an experience where I met the singer of a band. It's a band called Dance Gavin Dance. And they're like this technical, mathy, emo type band. And the singer, a guy called, what was his name? Johnny Craig. I'm sorry, I was thinking Johnny Owen, that's someone very different. Johnny Craig, he's well reported in the industry to be a massive idiot, like a bit total douche. And we played a show, we actually ended up playing a show together, Johnny Craig doing a solo thing, and we were headlining another stage. And I went over and introduced myself to him and he made me feel so small. And I was like, I never want anyone to feel, even though like he was such a small, I love that Dance Gavin Dance album that he sung on was one of my all-time favorite records. Like, I could listen to that cover to cover, no skips, and know every single word to every single song. It's one of those records, And I felt so deflated. And I was like, I never want, some people might feel that way about my band, that they really love the music. And I never want them to feel that I don't have the time for them. And I really, because of that kind of experience, I massively over-indexed on it to really like, how are you? Tell me about you. Tell me, I want to hear about your stuff. Like, forget me as a band guy. Like, what's your kids' names? What do you do as a job? Like, and I think that kind of trained me, I think, for the next stage of life when that's actually a skill that's quite desirable, not just something you do because you feel you ought to.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that make or break people. If you have a bad reputation, I know there's been certain people that I could have interviewed, but I was like, oh, I don't know, never meet your idol type thing. But you took that as a learning experience, and that's a great thing. So being a frontman, it's its own kind of leadership in a way. Do you see parallels between commanding a stage and leading in business?
Certainly charisma. I find there's different types of leadership, right? That not every leader has to be this charismatic, although that's the leaders that I gravitate towards. But naturally, like attracts like, right? I find myself going towards leaders that are inspiring and kind of fill rooms. So I don't think all leaders need to be like that. But certainly the charisma and being able to kind of command a room is super important. Something that it's a learned behavior for me, something that I've been able to kind of carry that forward. And I always think about whether it's a meeting or a coffee or a Zoom call or whatever, I always kind of think about these things as stages and performances. I very much frame things in my mind as if I'm doing a stage show, even though it might be, a pitch call or, just to check in with a contact at a client. But I think the really interesting thing about bands is there's 5 people or 5. We had configurations of 5 and 4. That's the bit that I think where leadership is really, really interesting, because there's always in every single band, there's always one person who kind of is the leader, but then bands attract people with big egos. So you tend to have this friction of the people that are in the band and trying to hold these things together. And that's that kind of how to manage a group of individuals and create something that's greater than some of its parts. That's the thing that I think I took the biggest thing away. The charisma thing is great and it's a skill for me. I don't think it's a must-have to be a great leader, but I think being able to kind of orchestrate a group clearly leadership, that's the most important thing that you need to have.
Yes, absolutely. So let's pivot on to your new role. Now you're stepping into the chief commercial officer role, which is really cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What excites you most about this opportunity?
So I started my career at a kind of more a scale up than a startup, I suppose. But I worked for a couple of startups, more smaller organizations, should we say, before joining Microsoft. And whilst Microsoft was a fantastic learning curve for me, and I proved that I could do what I did elsewhere in a big corporate machine, and I can kind of, the skills are transferable and I'm able to do it. And I kind of climbed about as far up to the top of the tree as you can with Microsoft, with the kind of client I ended up looking after. I always wanted to go back to startups. I wanted to do something exciting. I've got a burning desire to kind of do something that's a bit world changing, something that's going to be, genuine, leave a mark on the world. Think about legacy and all these sorts of things that could, for the betterment of humanity, right? And I've been chatting to Mel, the guy that founded Corpora. I kind of dropped him a message on LinkedIn about a year ago and just said, "Oh, it looks interesting what you're doing. I'd love to learn more." And we stayed in touch. And this new business, Corpora, is so interesting in the way that they're attacking the market. It's not a typical sales thing. We're talking about frontier research. We're talking about dealing with scientists, dealing with universities, dealing with tech spin out. The technology they build that underpins this whole thing is phenomenal. And it's really, really exciting to go and join something obviously super new, still kind of start understanding the business and how it works and understanding how it works today, which might not be how it works tomorrow, because that's how startups are, right? Things, you pivot on a dime. But yeah, just getting in where you can have an outsized impact. I'm still interested to find out exactly what chief commercial officer means in this context. I'm the type of guy, if they want me to go mop the floors, I'll go grab the bucket. If it needs doing, I'll do it. And I think that's the joy of being in a startup, is that you can go and try and be effective in so many different areas and wear so many different hats and be so multifaceted. I think I'm really looking forward to that challenge of how can I bring some other skills to the table, not just, the sales stuff that I've done, but the other bits that I think I'll be pretty good at too.
That's excellent. That's an exciting opportunity. I always love to research startups. My dad, he does a whole bunch of startups and stuff, and I'm always intrigued by it, but I've never really understood business because I'm like an artsy person. So I don't really know much about it, but this has to do with AI, correct?
Yeah, so they built an AI platform. So the secret sauce is really in the database. They built this graph database or hypergraph database that's super interesting, and how they're using then the breadth and depth of data that they can collate within this data set that they're maintaining with an LLM to kind of build some summarization and use that then to create novel and really interesting hypotheses for startups and for businesses that are looking to change the world, right? I think there's some really interesting examples they've already got of stuff that's super cool, that is, to my point, quite revolutionary, quite world changing. I think it might be an opportunity to do 3 or 4 of those things, right?
AI is such a multifaceted, thing that a lot of people don't understand, but it's really helpful. The databases. I'm a professor, so I hate to say it, but I use it sometimes for my research and stuff, and I know my students do. So I think it's the future. So it's great that you're getting involved in it. Now, let's kind of pivot over to your plot twist a little bit, because we already know what that is. You essentially lived multiple lives already. What does reinvention actually require that people maybe underestimate?
So I think for me, it's been about evolution, not revolution, right? At no point have I tried to fundamentally change what I am and who I am. I think what I learned, especially coming back to the kind of previous ramble I made about kind of making people feel special and understanding your purpose in that conversation, how to come across. I realize it's the authenticity that's the most important thing, right? I think being true to who you are and how you like to operate in the world, right? How you like to be perceived in the world, how you perceive things in the world, and sharing that perspective and being perceived with that perspective. I know that's kind of a bit of a tongue twister. Has been super important for me. I've never hidden the fact that I come from the music industry. I talk about it all the time, but I'm quite happy to send people YouTube videos of me when I was 16, and just being proud of that. I think I think it's easy to say as a you know, I guess a blonde haired 6'3" white guy to just be yourself, right? Because I don't have the implicit things that other people have that they might hide. And I grew up in a very poor environment. I grew up in a council estate in the UK. I grew up in a very diverse environment. I understand the challenges that people go through in order to try and be perceived in a way that they feel comfortable with, but also the hangovers that those perceptions have for those people too. Presenting yourself as you are has always been something I've been able to use to tear down the barriers to creating meaningful relationships. And I think when people understand that by acting as yourself unabashedly and unashamedly yourself, you give other people permission to do the same thing. And that's when you get to that comfort zone. And that's when you get to the place where people are happy to kind of share and, you know, be themselves in front of you. And that's a solid foundation for trust. So when it came to kind of pivoting from music to the corporate world, the thing that I struggled the most with was the code switching around, you know, the technical terms, these analogies that people use, like opening the kimono. I'm still not entirely sure what that means. And I'm fairly confident it's nothing good. But I had to adjust to that. But then I realized that the thing that I was great at was just not using that language. I tried to affect this kind of voice and, you know, this vocabulary. And then I realized that it just wasn't me. So I stopped doing it. And when I stopped, that's when people were like, oh, you're a straight talker. And I was like, no, it's just, I just don't fluff the language. I understand in the music industry, you probably swear a lot more than you do in tech, although not as much, the gap isn't as big as maybe you think it is. But that kind of just brusqueness is my personality and directness is my personality. And just by being that way, people have always kind of responded well to that because they know I'm not doing it for any personal intention. It's just who I am. And I think being able to kind of do that has been the thing that's carried me and maybe avoided me having to try and reinvent myself for this new role and just carried my true self through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those listening who may feel stuck in the wrong chapter of their life, what advice could you give them?
I think the thing that has driven me and helped me in times of like interest and was that Chinese problem of may you live in interesting times, right? I think that there's a conception that you always need to be striving to do something better and bigger, right? If it's not upwards, then it's backwards. And there's a really good book that I read around squiggly careers, which is this kind of side to side journey that most people make. So I think you should have permission to try new things. I think you should have permission to not relentlessly try and pursue a ladder of promotion. But what I've always tried to do is do things that bring me joy. I think joy is the most underutilized aspect in the working world. People see work as very separate to the things that they do that bring them joy. And I really enjoy my job. I know it's, you know, coming from a big tech company and this kind of stuff, but even when I was working in like a little ed tech business and, you know, earning, you know, peanuts, and I really enjoyed the process. I really enjoyed that. And that just through the sheer joy of the thing that I was doing and I found it. That's how I found opportunities came to me, you know, or when I went for an opportunity, I was the one that got picked for it because I was so happy to be in that role. And I think that's a difference maker. So if you're in a place where you're feeling confused or you're feeling dejected or you're feeling a bit burnt out, I go back to first principles. Like, what do you love? What do you love doing? And everyone loves like sleeping in and everyone loves going for a beer on the weekend. But are there things in life that you find that bring you real joy? And then try and make some decisions that take you towards that, rather than trying to think, how can I make more money and how can I try and get to the rat race or retire earlier? If you find the joy in things and try to baseline yourself around that, I think you'll always find the next thing will always come to you rather than you having to go and seek it out.
Yes, very well said. So where can the listeners find you? And I guess your music, is it still on Spotify and YouTube?
Yeah, we're on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just the band's called Martyr Defiled. I'm sure the transcription will pick that up better than I said it. But yeah, so you can check us out on YouTube. We got a couple of million plays on Spotify. Frustratingly, our Spotify streaming numbers are lower than I'd like them to be. When we were releasing records, people were still buying CDs. We missed a lot of the streams that way, which in retrospect is painful. Yeah, so that's the band. Then if you want to catch me on LinkedIn, it's just linkedin.com/MattXJones is my stuff. That's my professional. Nobody wants me to come and listen to me tweeting about my football team, soccer team. So avoid me on Twitter unless you're a Nottingham Forest fan.
I got that. So make sure the links are in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Matt's story is such a perfect reminder that reinvention doesn't always mean becoming someone entirely new. Sometimes it means taking every strange, loud, chaotic, unexpected chapter with you and letting it shape the next version of who you are. From fronting Martyr Defiled to stepping into the world of tech, AI, and startup leadership, Matt's path is proof that skills we pick up in one life can carry us into another. Charisma, humility, resilience, reading the room, making people feel seen, those things matter, whether you're on stage in front of hundreds of people or building something meant to change the future. And I loved what he said about joy, not chasing the ladder just because we're told to climb it, but paying attention to what actually makes us feel alive. Because sometimes the next plot twist doesn't come from forcing a reinvention. Sometimes it comes from finally letting yourself evolve. A huge thank you to Matt for joining me on Plot Twist Radio. You can find his former band, Martyr Defiled, wherever you stream music, and I'll have Matt's links in the show notes. Until next time, my name is Erin, and this is Plot Twist Radio.